Well, I couldn't be more excited to talk to my summer read. I'm talking to Christopher Rice or C. Travis Rice. We'll get into that in a second. Happy Pride, Christopher.
Absolutely. Happy Pride to you too. I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, we'll get into your book, but just to introduce you, Christopher Rice is the recipient of the Lambda Literary Award and is the Amazon Charts and New York Times bestseller author of A Density of Souls, Bone Music, Blood Echo, and Blood Victory in the Burning Girl series, and Bram Stoker Award finalist, The Heavens Rise and the Vines. You are an executive producer for TV, penned 2 novels with your mother, none other than Anne Rice, which is really exciting. And you also have a podcast series, which I want to talk about a little bit later. But welcome to Tag's podcast.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, you, like I said, have the summer read that we all need to read, and I'm
Oh,
talking about Sapphire Dawn.
right.
It's such a great read because I was in Portugal last week where I started it, and I
Mm.
ended it last night on my flight from New York to San Francisco, where I'm currently at, and I feverishly got through this and loved every page of it.
Oh, wonderful. Thank
Y
you.
Yes, exactly, and just to give everybody a little bit of context, I didn't realize until a little bit later that it's a series. Although you can read this book on its own, it's part of
Yes.
a series, and this is the 4th installment, and the
Yeah.
other ones are Sapphire Sunset, Sapphire Spring, Sapphire Storm, and this, of course, Sapphire Dawn. Um, I can't now wait to go read the other series to go backwards, but just to give a little bit, and then I want to hear the premise. Essentially, it's a huge wedding that's happening on Sapphire Cove, which is in Orange County, California, and the wedding is of Logan and Connor. And
Hmm.
Connor runs the hotel Sapphire Cove. Logan runs security, correct?
Right. Yes.
Head of
Director of
security.
security. Yeah.
And the main characters at hand who you end up falling in love with are Richard Merriweather, who's the highfalutin, fancy pants wedding planner of the
Hmm.
century, who meets up with Donnie Bascombe, who is running an adult or porn studio.
Hmm.
And they are unlikely characters that fall in love, and
Hmm.
a lot other ensues, including a huge backstory. Can you talk to me, though, a little bit about these two characters and how they're so unlikely characters and their backstories are so layered?
So Richard is new to the series. He's not shown up in any of the books before, but Donnie has been a mainstay right along. And Donnie in the first book is the sort of outspoken, outrageous, totally shameless, proud sex worker who runs his own porn studio. And he's always been Logan's best friend. And so when it came time to finally get Logan and Connor are the couple from the first book. And so when it came time to get them married, I was thinking, well, actually, what I was thinking first was, how am I ever going to tell Donnie's love story? Like, who is the right partner for this guy? Because I wasn't going to have somebody who makes him compromise his career or his personal values around sex. I'm not going to have anybody water Donnie down just to get him married, because that's not Donnie.
Right.
Um, so I was agonizing over, like, does this book happen in this world? Does Donnie's story happen here, or is it a spinoff? Do I need to go down to San Diego and sort of dive into his porn world down there, his professional life? And my best friend, Eric Shaw Quinn, who I do a podcast with over at thedinnerpartyshow.com, he said, oh, no, you just have Donnie be the best man for the wedding, and he has to work with some totally pretentious wedding. Like, he just came up with the whole concept for me right there. And I was like, oh okay. I guess that's really easy for you. But it's part of the reason why we're best friends. Eric is a wonderful kind of development and idea and concept guy, and he's also a great writer. So once I had that foundation to stand on, it was like, okay, I have Donnie's book. And for the first, it is the most rom-commy in the series, right? The books they have a kind of Bridgerton structure to them. I use that example because people are really familiar with it, but it's been in use in romance novels since the 80s, really, which is, the books in the series are not really like serialized in that sense of, there's a cliffhanger at the end of one and you got to read two to figure it out. It's not like that. every story is focused on a different couple, and it tells their story almost like a standalone. So you really can jump on at any point in this series. And I do that in part because I'm a terrible series reader. Like I can't
Right.
remember what I read 2 months ago. So like I'm not going to be able. I'm never going to expect readers to have an encyclopedic knowledge of the book they read before. So, but Donnie has been popping up right along, and one of the interesting things is that I knew he's always been called Sex Monster, and he's been this total horn dog. Um, but I looked at the scenes in which I had written him in previous books, and I was like, he's a really good friend. Like he's
Right.
always got really good advice, because his advice is always about be authentic, embrace your true self, but don't be stupid. It's
Right.
basically, and he's very from the hip about all of it.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, their backgrounds are really what are at the core of this. You dive deep into their backgrounds. One
Mhm.
of them, Richard, comes basically a silver spoon in his mouth, money, and
Yeah.
is now this highfalutin wedding planner. Donnie, on the other hand, didn't have a great childhood. I think his father,
Mhm.
left him. He was really didn't have the greatest childhood, like I said, and got into porn, but has turned it around and now is heading up his own porn studio.
Right.
What is it about unlikely characters that we love so much? I mean, there's a reference in your book to the movie that came out, I think it was late last year, Red, White, and Royal
Mhm.
Blue. The idea
Right.
when you pit two characters, I mean, it's an age-old story, but why do we love that so much?
Well, I think that being in a relationship is really hard, just
Yeah.
in general. It doesn't matter what it is, if it's a polyamorous one, if it's a monogamous one, if it's a straight one, a gay one. It's really hard to be with somebody and not lose your shit. Pardon my language. So I think that when we get to see, sort of like we like thrillers because we like to see people survive, because sometimes they chart the course for how we might survive in a similar situation, whether it's emotionally, psychologically, or literally physically.
Yeah.
I'm not saying look to Marvel movies for tips on how to get out of a sinking car, but you know what I mean. It's that catharsis that we look for. So when two people seem totally opposite and they
Yeah.
collide with each other, they're really starting at an obvious baseline where we root for them and we want them to sort of come over this. And I think as a writer, it's a great challenge, because it's really, the first book, Logan and Connor, they're really perfect for each other. What's not lined up are their circumstances. Logan
Mm,
needs his job at the hotel to pay his father's medical bills. He does not need to be messing around with the scion of the family that owns it. They can't be together for those reasons, but chemically in the bedroom, they're perfect. They're perfectly matched. So this was different. These are two people where you think from the outset, oh, they couldn't be more different. But Richard is going through this experience of having married the man who looked perfect on paper, hedge fund manager, multimillionaire, socially connected, total bastard, like
yeah.
just slept with all their friends behind his back. Um, and, really, like Richard even says at one point, if he'd come to me asking to open up the relationship, I might have said yes, but he didn't ask because he didn't want me to give him permission. Like what his kink was betrayal and sneaking around and getting away with it. And really, like, he targeted our mutual friends. Like, so the husband is really a prince in public and a nightmare at home. So he's in this place in his life where, even though his profession is all about elegance and class and how things look, he's dealing with the fact that someone's behavior is what defines them. Someone's choices are what define them, you
Yeah,
know?
I think one of the things I love about what we tackle on this show a lot, is the idea of monogamy, open relationships, and like you just stated, Richard does say at one point, maybe if he had just told me, my ex-husband had just told me that, I would have been open to this, but it's the lying. I mean, I'm in a new relationship myself too, and
Mhm.
we're of a certain age now, and I think that's
Right.
what's really cool about these characters too, is that they're not young. It's
Mm.
refreshing to see people of a certain age, gay men of a certain age, entering a relationship with their complicated past that
Right.
many of us gay men have. What was it about the age group and what we bring to the table that was exciting to write about?
Oh, it was so exciting because I'm in this age group, like I'm 46 years old. And most romance fiction, even though I love it, it's about young love. It's about
Yeah,
first love. And it's about a generation that doesn't necessarily have the baggage and the scars that I have. And I think, Donnie's a very extreme example, but Donnie was part of an epidemic of runaways that and queer kids who were thrown out of their homes that continues up until this day. His father basically threw him out when he found him making out with another boy, and his options in either the late 90s or the early 2000s, I guess, based on how old he is, are fewer than what they are now. They're still not great. Nobody should be thrown out of their home for
right.
being queer. It's horrible. So that's very much about it. He travels through a porn business and world that's different than the way it works today. When he starts, there's going to be a lot more stigma around the business. There's no OnlyFans. There's no social media. We don't know much that's real about our porn performers. That was kind of how it was in 1999 or 96, I should say, when I came out. Um, so all of that was really interesting, but dealing with two characters who have a long relationship history, as you pointed out, a long history of being hurt, falling in love. They've both had their hearts broken in their past, and I love any romance story that's about a character exploring how they need to change their perception or move through something about their past to be with the one who wants to love them today. And the thing that was fascinating about Donnie is that right along, and in the previous book, he tells his fellow sex workers, you are not broken. You are entitled to the relationship that you want and you want to be in. And then when he arrives at the moment when he's got to take that advice himself, he really has a moment of struggle. Like he really struggles with it. It's like it's really easy when you're not the one in love. It's easy to get on your high horse about being true to yourself. So all of that was really, really rich and fascinating. And like I liked the conversations they had. The thing that Donnie says to Richard early on when they're having their sort of sparring is Richard says to him, "Do you even believe in cheating? Like, is that even a thing in your world?" And he says, "Cheating is what a couple decides it is." And I think that's really key. That's fundamental. You know what I mean? It's not about the number of parties. If you're not lying to your partner, then it's not cheating. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I love that. Yeah. Something that a recent guest said on our show is rather than rules in a relationship, we have negotiations because
Mhm.
negotiations can always be, but you got to be truthful to have these
Right.
things. Let's talk about sex because Donnie, of course, is a former porn star, runs a studio. We're a sex podcast. There are some
Mhm.
really juicy scenes, including one that I loved where it's about role play
Mhm.
and it's all set in a Richard has a choice. He could choose many different scenes in Donnie's studio of what he would like to. He chooses the doctor
Oh,
patient
yeah.
scene. It
Yeah.
is, I was reading it on the plane and getting a little verklempt myself and getting a little hot and bothered.
Excellent.
And I was like looking around, can anyone see me? It's like, no, of course they can't see what I'm reading, but I felt that warmness growing and
Yeah.
for sure. What's it like writing sex scenes like this? Because you really go there. And are they the same or similar in the first three books?
Well, the heat level, the explicitness is the same across all the books. I think there
Nice.
might be a few books where there are about 2 or 3 really intense open doors, they say, sex scenes in all the books. Um, I love writing them. They're very hard to write. They're very hard to write and keep interesting. And you can write sex, this body
Yeah.
part went here, whatever, but to have them be about where the characters are in their relationship, like the thing that I loved about the role play scene is that it's basically, Richard has had his heart broken by his husband. So the scene that they set up together is that he's going into the doctor to see if he can really bottom and relax because he's not opening up for his husband. So they do this whole scene where, well, what you really need is this gorgeous doctor in the form of Donnie to make
Right.
sure you're
We all
I mean,
need
it's just
that.
it's the kind of porn that I love. I love
Yeah.
stupid 80s, 90s porn where there was some forbidden setup. That's totally my jam. So, but it's about Richard owning his voice, asking for what he wanted. It's about Donnie trying to do a better job than the ex-husband did. So all these things that are in the sex scene are about where these characters are. But to do that and to keep it fun, so you don't just have people crying in the middle of sex and saying, "This was the greatest sex," like
Correct.
you wanna show instead of tell, like you do in all good writing. But I think, the thing that you do end up writing the sex that you enjoy having, like you do, like sometimes the publishers are like, do we really need this many rim jobs in this book? Like, really,
Do you hear a
like,
little pushback from your from the publishing company?
well, the publishing company that does these books is all about a sensual erotic romance. That's really
Okay.
their brand. So I don't get a lot of pushback. I think they have some questions, and I think one of the things there's a kind of second wave happening on Book Talk. A lot of queer male book talkers are getting followings, and they've been really supportive of these books. But there's one guy, Carter Kalchek, who's really great, and he basically does reviews of how authentic the butt stuff is in a male or queer romance, right? And I was so glad to encounter his content because I would read a lot of these books and the guys would go out for a night of pizza and beer and then they would be jamming. And I'm like, no, it's not gonna happen.
Thank you.
It-
Right.
it's not gonna happen. So yeah, it's
Yeah, I think you have a lot of great references on at one point Donnie's gonna make a fabulous dinner for Richard and he's like, but I'll cook after. We'll have sex
yes,
first
right.
on his amazing boat. And so yeah. I mean
Totally.
realistic things that we think about as gay
Yeah,
men. Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
One of the things I also love on page 299 is that you really, and we've been talking about this on our show recently too, is that hookup culture we love. We've our 7-year-old podcast, and so we're all about cruise bars and all that. But some of us are now in relationships, and the sex that you can actually have when you're connected with somebody can be that
Mhm.
much more intense. And you say that on page 299, where you're talking about the essentially, well, it's essentially the idea that there is connected sex that you can have when you're with somebody and when you wake up to
Right.
somebody that you want to have. Talk to me a little bit about that kind of sex. That I mean, are you in a relationship and
I'm
that
not.
you
That's
can
why
relate to?
I was feeling
Yeah.
like an imposter as you asked this question because I'm not really in
That's
a
okay
relationship.
though. Yeah, yeah.
I've been in relationships and I have reached that point with people where it is like we know our bodies so well and we know what the other person likes. And my best friend Eric Shaw Quinn, who I think I mentioned him earlier, we do our podcast together, which is more of a true crime kind of mystery podcast, but we talk about relationship issues sometimes. And in our personal lives, we talk about it a lot. And he says it's so much more satisfying to be with someone who knows where all your buttons are than to be rebuilding the roller coaster each time out with somebody new. And
Oh,
he's
yeah.
really, that's sort of his orientation. He's more monogamy minded, but it is really, it can be great. And I think some of the best sex I've ever had was with someone. I reached a point, I think around the age of 35 or 36, where I realized I couldn't get turned on for a total stranger walking into my house anymore. Like someone,
Oh,
I didn't need to be wedded to them or really close to them, but just the sort of hookup thing where it's like, walk in, let's try. That wasn't working for me anymore. It had worked for a while, don't get me wrong,
yeah.
but there was this shift that happened where I needed to be more familiar with them than that. And there needed to be a more sort of like, I don't know, some sort of introduction.
Connection. Yeah.
Yeah, some kind of connection. And so, that helps you write a romance novel because it's all about connection.
We should mention though that there's an underbelly which includes international
Mhm.
take to this story that is really makes this love story that much more layered. Both of
Mhm.
them have complicated pasts, and it becomes almost a little bit of a thriller at one point,
Yeah.
which is really good without giving away too much. Is this what we see in all your series of books, or is it specific to this one?
I would say it's the recipe for the Sapphire Cove series. My other books outside that are not under the C. Travis Rice brand, they can be very dark, very violent, not romances, totally thrillers. These have, I think, just enough to feel like the season finale of an Aaron Spelling show from the 80s. Although I
Yeah.
did have somebody say I should give myself more credit than that because he was a bigger fan of the book than he was of those shows. But There is, yeah, there is big drama. There is a soap operatic quality to a lot of this. Like I like to say, there's a glossy candy coating around the discussion of these issues that are about relationships and gay sex that are very important to me. But I like to all tie it in with a theme, and I think there's a big theme in this book because there's so much exploration of sex work and the porn industry, which I wanted to be accurate and not puritanical. And I'm happy I'm getting high marks from my porn friends on the depictions. But the reality is that the shelf life for a performer is short.
Right.
It's a little bit longer than it used to be because of things like OnlyFans, which have allowed kind of individual monetization in that front. But there's, if you're not going to go behind the camera, it's not really a long-term career option for a lot of people. And so there has been a kind of storyline from the last book to this one about Donnie's past and his past love interests. And they were all sex workers. And it was about who adapted to the changes that were coming and who didn't. And so you have a character who didn't adapt well. And so I really love that exploration. And maybe it's just because I live in Southern California where there's this sense that like after a certain age, everybody is invisible here, which is not entirely accurate. It's more of a feeling than anything else that a lot of us deal with. But that's always been a classic noir storyline in Los Angeles, right? The actress
Right.
who didn't make it, who turned to crime because she was past her prime, right? And now she's in the detective's office trying to blackmail something,
I love
So,
it.
yeah, I did no keeping that out of my books.
Nice, nice. Well, I love the book so much, and I understand that there's a fifth book down the pipeline.
That's my plan. My plan is, there is an allusion to another story at the very end of this book. I had originally planned 3. When I got to 3, I said I have at least 2 more, and they're all about characters, right? Whose character do I want to tell a love story for? And there's one more character that really needs to get his story told in this universe, and then I think that might be the end for Sapphire Cove.
Good. Well, I haven't read the first, so I'm going to go all the way back to 1, 2, and 3. And
Excellent.
yeah, it's so great. Really quickly, talk to me about you mentioned it already, but you have the dinner party
Yeah.
show with your friend Eric Shaw Quinn.
Yes.
And talk to me about that. And then you have another show as well, just your names, Christopher and Eric.
Well, yeah, the dinner party show is really our network and our website. The podcast we're currently producing is called Christopher and Eric, and we have a series inside of it called Christopher and Eric's True Crime TV Club. And we were actually very involved in helping solve a murder, which has been amazing. And
Wow.
all those episodes are on our main page. It was the murder of Billy Newton in 1990, who was a porn performer who the details are quite gruesome. And this is a sex podcast, but the whole story, we set up a tip line and we brought all this attention to it, and the LAPD got in touch with us because of our work on the case, and our work eventually made its way to a man named Clark Williams, who really put all the pieces together and identified the killer as currently being on death row in another state for a series of crimes. It's an
Wow.
amazing story, and all those episodes are up under the murder of Billy Newton on the homepage at thedinnerpartyshow.com. So that's great. The Sapphire Cove series has its own website at visitsapphire.cove.com. And then all my sort of multi-genre books are at christopherricebooks.com.
Got it. I love it. Well, and then how can people follow you if they want to follow you besides that?
Mostly I always forget I have to look at my phone. So I'm really active on Instagram and on Facebook. And I think on Instagram I'm christopher.rice.writer. And Facebook, what am I on Facebook? I know my Eric's nephew calls people who use Facebook geezers. Here I am
I
struggling
love
through
it.
my phone. So yeah, if you search
I'll
for
list it.
Christopher Rice, yeah, there's a blue check mark for me on Facebook. And then I'm over on TikTok trying to make something happen with the young people, and it doesn't always go so well.
You could read excerpts because this book is so good.
Thank
C.
you.
Travis Rice, Christopher Rice. The book is called Sapphire Dawn. It is your summer read. I loved it so much,
Oh, thank
and you
you.
all need to read it. And I understand the audiobook should be
Yes.
coming out later this year.
It should be coming out in a few days. We're just waiting for the approval process to complete on the website, and I narrated it, so I'm very proud of my work.
I love it. Well, the book came out yesterday, June 25th. Get it, and happy reading. Thank you so much, and happy Pride, Christopher.
So happy Pride to you. Thanks for having me. It was great.